Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy. May all beings everywhere be peaceful. May all beings everywhere know the truth and be free. So the subject today is, why do we suffer? We see so much suffering in this world, and much of it seems inexplicable. A child is born with a disability. A good person loses his job or a member of his family. Wars and famines kill thousands. Is there any meaning for all this suffering? If one believes in a personal God, then one might say it's God's will. But why would a beneficent God will so much suffering? Can suffering somehow be transmuted into something positive and uplifting? Is there a way to end suffering? Actually, the question, why does suffering exist, has been with man since he first began to think. It really doesn't have an answer. It's like asking, why Maya? Or why is the world the way it is? We don't really know why. We just find ourselves in this situation. It is said that Swami Vivekananda once said, if I had been God, I would have created a better universe. Sometimes we feel like this. Yet if we look at suffering, we'll see that it has some causes. And perhaps it also does serve a purpose, even for us. In Buddhism, the first of the Four Noble Truths is that life is suffering. All life knows sorrow. We're caught in a web of suffering. Every embodied being, because it is embodied, feels suffering. We all desire to be free from pain and have pleasure. And yet we see that in life, having brings not having. Joy brings sorrow. Birth brings death. Pleasure brings pain. All things bring their opposite with them. We keep somehow hoping that someday we're going to figure it all out and everything is going to be good. It will all be joy and there'll be no pain. We spend most of our time and energies also simply trying to make our existence comfortable and more pleasurable. We want to be happy. But in the relative plane, lasting happiness isn't possible because the relative world itself is a series of changes. We need to really understand this. If we understand our bondage, then a desire to be free will come to us. Time, space, and causation are all tied up together with change, beginning and ending, life and death. We're not the same person we were even 5 minutes ago. Our cells are constantly dying and being reborn. Someone said every 7 years your entire body changes. Everything that has birth also decays and dies. In the Bhagavad Gita, Shri Krishna showed Arjuna his universal form as time, and it was horrific. Shri Krishna said, I am mighty, all world-destroying time, now engaged in slaying these men. He was chewing up the warriors within his mouth. Even Arjuna, who was a great warrior, was awestruck and frightened to see this terrible form of Krishna. Nothing stays the same. A jiva, a body-mind complex, is in reality a series of changes, all in time, who is the all-consumer and is chewing up every one of us. We all share this nature. It's once said that a woman whose son had just died, went to Buddha for consolation. And Buddha said to her, "Yes, but just do one thing for me. Please bring me some mustard seed, but you have to get the seed from a house where there's been no death." And the woman thought, "Oh, this will be easy." So she set out into the village to get the mustard seed. And at each house, when she asked the people for the seeds, they were very willing to give. But when she asked them if there had been any death in the house, they all said, "Oh yes, my wife died last year, or my brother died some time back, or my father died, or my child." Always there had been a death in the family, a death in the house. She kept asking all day long, going from house to house, but always got the same answer. After several days, she returned to Buddha and bowed at his feet. And when she stood up, somehow her grief had been somewhat assuaged because she realized that death was there for all beings. She became a spiritual aspirant and actually joined the nunnery. In Buddhism, there is a teaching: as I am, so are they. As they are, so am I. Thus one should not hurt any being. The second noble truth is that suffering has a cause or a source. Sorrow is defined as distress caused by loss, affliction, disappointment, or regret. When we're attached to something, we feel suffering when it changes. All suffering does have a cause. According to Buddhist and Vedantic thought, pain, both mental and physical, is directly caused by karmic forces, the fruits of our past physical and verbal and mental actions. These factors impel us to take birth in a body and cause us to experience pain. But when one lives a truly spiritual life, even though there may be pain, one can live so that one is not distressed by it. One can live so that one doesn't build further painful karmas. By offering all the work that we do, or by seeing in fact we're not the doer, we can cut these bonds of karma. A person established in truth will see that disease, old age, and death come to all beings. Many unsatisfactory experiences of life are natural. They're just a part of the life cycle. So an advanced spiritual aspirant will not allow his mind to be distressed by them. Or we may actually look at suffering as a means of working out lessons that we need to learn here, such as patience, forbearance, and compassion. Often these painful things are our greatest teachers. We're confused about things. We don't see them as they really are, so we suffer. Suffering is also caused by afflictive emotions. Because our confusion, we feel emotions such as obscuration, anger, desire, and hatred. These emotions are painful and they lead to more confusion, more actions which only increase our pain and suffering. It's said that the cause of klesha, or pain, are fivefold. 1, ignorance. 2, attachment and aversion. 3, egoism. 4, clinging to life. Our constant desire for things and our attachment, our clinging to life, bring us in the end to pain. We suffer when we cling to something which is about to change, or when we desire something that we can't have. We suffer also when we're united with something that we don't want. We should look into our own minds and see the truth of this. Every time we get caught with that tight, clinging feeling and wringing of the heart, that uncomfortable feeling inside, which we call suffering, it's because we want something, or we're trying to cling to something that's changing, or we want to get away from something that we are united with. We're constantly reaching out for, trying to get or hold on to something, grabbing and holding, trying to complete ourselves. If you honestly look at your own mind, you'll see that this is true. I also have found this every time. It's the clinging or the pushing away, the attachment or the aversion that causes the suffering. I want this. I don't want that. Swami Vivekananda says, what makes us miserable? The cause of all miseries from which we suffer is desire. The secret is, if we really understand the cause of our suffering, we can let go of our attachment to the pain-bringing actions. Selfishness is the cause of suffering. There's no other cause. And we won't really be free from suffering until we discover that we are not separate little entities. We are united already, complete and whole. We don't need anything from outside to complete us. According to Buddhist and Vedantic thought, all suffering is dependent arising. That is, it's within the realm of causation and time, this vyavaharika satya, transactional reality. It comes because of change. It is dependent on relationships between things, cause and effect. If we study the situations, we see that even pleasures, because they change, carry the seeds of suffering within them. All beings desire to be free from pain, both physical and mental. This is natural. But we don't know how to get real happiness. We keep looking for it out there. We keep seeking a kind of happiness that carries the pain-bringing seeds within it. Every action brings a reaction. We're caught up in our actions, many of which only further bring pain. Within the realm of causation, there will always be desire, grief, and pain. Through the change of pleasures, their nature of suffering is revealed. Swamiji tells us we've bound ourselves by our own action. We've thrown the network of our own actions around us, and we've set the law of causation in motion. We've set the wheel in motion, and now we're being ground up in it. If you look closely, you'll see that this is true. The third noble truth is that there's a cessation of suffering. Because it does have a cause, it will have an end. What a wonderful message. This is what we want to hear. But what does it mean? Does it mean sitting in a cave all day away from things? No, there's no escape in that. Disease, hunger, death, they're going to find you even in the cave. Does it mean we can have only pleasure and no pain? Can we fix the world so that there's only happiness? No. It means real renunciation, giving up, letting go of that attachment and that aversion to things, going beyond this world. This may be done in the cave, or it may be done in the midst of all our actions. If pleasure carries the seeds of suffering in them, then they too have to be given up. Well, what then is left? Is it some sort of void, a frightening annihilation? No, we're seeking an abiding happiness, truth, and truth alone. All the sages tell us that truth is blissful. The greater the renunciation, the greater the bliss, says Swami Akhandananda, because our true nature is then revealed. It is said when one even touches that ground, that inner truth, bliss, Ananda, wells up spontaneously from within. There is no have and have not. The very question of suffering or lower pleasure disappears like a dream. If we believe that suffering can have an end, that we can wake up, then the next question arises immediately. What is the way to remove our suffering, to remove all sorrow? The fourth noble truth gives us the answer, the way out of suffering. In a nutshell, it's spiritual practice. In Buddhism, it's called the Eightfold Path. Right understanding, right aspiration, right speech, right action or conduct, right livelihood, right effort and right mindfulness, right meditation. These are all spiritual practices. Vedanta also says through spiritual disciplines and self-effort and grace, one can realize the truth. Liberation is possible. According to Advaitic philosophy, one must follow the path of knowledge. One must realize directly, in a totally non-dualistic manner, the final nature of the mind. This is the path of jnana. In some forms of Hinduism and other religious traditions, even in some forms of Buddhism, another path, the path of bhakti, is taught. In this path, with real faith and trust, one seeks refuge in a personal God. Whichever path we follow, we're seeking to be free from sorrow. In Vedanta, we say one must realize God, and this means giving up the little self. When one really lets go of things and sees them as they are, or really takes refuge, immediately the heart will be filled with bliss, because that is our own true nature, free and pure. It's ignorance of our own nature that causes the suffering. We're confused, we're identifying ourselves with other things, and we're unwilling to let go of this identification. If someone asks us the question, "Who are you?" we usually reply with our name. If questioned further, we might say, "I'm a man or a woman," or describe ourselves as young, old, tall, short, fat, thin, all descriptions of our body. Or one might say, "I'm an Indian, an Asian, an American," or perhaps, "I'm a bus driver, a farmer, a student, a doctor, a nun, a mother, a husband." Again, all descriptions of the body or actions that we do. Is this really who we are? What does our name signify anyway? A bundle of past impressions riding around in a decaying body? Swamiji tells us, the greatest of all lies that we tell ourselves is that we are a body. Body is the name of a stream of matter continuously changing. Mind is the name of a stream of consciousness of thought continuously changing. All these identities that we've given ourselves bring us pain because we cling to them. There's a story of the holy man and the king. Once a king called a holy man to him and asked to be taught how to be free from sorrow. The sage went near a pillar and grabbed hold of it and began to cry, "Free me, free me." The king was mystified. The next day, the sage came again and he held on to the pillar again, weeping and complaining that he couldn't get free. The king decided that that sage has gone completely crazy. It went on for several days. And finally the king had had enough. He said, "For heaven's sakes, you are free. Let go of the pillar." The sage smiled and he let go of the pillar and he said, "You too, O king, are already free." We see in the Vairagya Satakam verses on renunciation. In enjoyment, there's fear of disease. In social position, the fear of falling. In wealth, the fear of hostile kings. In honor, the fear of humiliation. In power, the fear of enemies. In beauty, the fear of old age. In scholarship, the fear of opponents. In virtue, the fear of scandal. In body, the fear of death. Everything in the world is followed by fear. Renunciation alone brings fearlessness. All things bring attachment and fear of change or loss. Life on this external level is always painful and full of fear. Is there anything we can learn from it? Is there any way the suffering itself can be actually turned into an advantage? Many mystics and sages say there is. Sometimes suffering or pain causes us to turn inward, to seek a way out of our afflictions. If everything in life is going smoothly, then we tend to think that things are going to continue as they are, and we don't feel inclined to struggle. Buddha's father tried to keep him from seeing disease, old age, and death because he knew if Buddha saw them, he would renounce the world. Yudhisthira, the brother of Arjuna, once asked the question, "What's the most wonderful thing in the world?" And he replied, "That men see death around them every day, and yet they think, 'I shall not die.'" We seem to lull ourselves to sleep here in the world. The world, with its myriad colors and sounds, is singing us a lullaby. There was an old song sung by the Grateful Dead, and one of the lines was, "Wake me, shake me, don't let me sleep too long." Sometimes a few blows, a good kick in the world will help wake us up. Do we remember that all beings, including ourselves, are in the process of dying every moment? What does it mean for us? Swami Vivekananda says, "Do you see that you have eyes? When others speak of the eyes, then you're reminded you have eyes." Again, when dust or sand enters into them and sets up an irritation, you feel quite strongly you do have eyes. Similarly, the realization of the universal Atman, which is more inner than the innermost, is not easily attained. Reading from scriptures or hearing from the lips of a preceptor, one has some idea of it. But when the hard lashes of the bitter sorrow and pain of the world make the heart sore, when the death of one's near and dear relatives happens, man thinks himself helpless. When an impenetrable and insurmountable darkness about the future life agitates his mind, then does the jiva pant for realization of the Atman. Therefore is sorrow helpful for the knowledge of the Atman. When buffeted by sorrows in this world of disease and death, when one is driven to desperation and helplessness, then he seeks refuge with someone relying on whom he may feel safe. And where is that refuge to be found? The omnipresent Atman, which depends on nothing else for its support, is the only refuge that is within each one of us. Suffering itself can be the stimulation that urges a man onward to realization. Sometimes when one is really hurt by this world, when, say, someone we really love dies and we suffer grief, suddenly from the heart a real cry goes up. I want something that cannot die, something that can never be taken away. We seek satisfaction in this external world, and again we suffer. Sometimes it can be this very suffering that causes us to turn inward, to search for fulfillment, for something higher that can't be taken away and can never die. Holy Mother actually said, "Suffering is a blessing." People complain about their grief and sorrow, she said, and how they pray to God and find no relief from pain. But grief itself is a gift of God. It's a symbol of His compassion. Tell me, who in this world has not had to bear sorrow? End of quote. As I am, so are they. As they are, so am I. We act, and there is always the idea, I'm doing something, and the intention behind the action. Therefore, there's karma in it. And unfortunately, that builds more karma. A truly illumined soul does not act in this fashion. The action flows through him or her without any obstruction. It's really what is meant by doing God's will. The action flows directly from a higher reality without any idea of agent, without any obscuration or intent from a separate entity. The higher reality is the source of all action to the illumined soul. There is no obstruction to it. Through suffering, through forbearance, a person often gains inner strength. It's like a great austerity to bear suffering cheerfully without complaint. Forbearance, or titiksha, strengthens the willpower. It's one of the great virtues. In some traditions, aspirants have actually intentionally sought out painful austerities to practice, to strengthen their self-control and will. I'm not advocating hair shirts or beds of nails. The middle path seems much more appropriate. But when pain does come to us, and it will come to every one of us, this suffering itself can be used as a spiritual practice. One of the Swamis tells us, "You probably would be surprised to learn that our greatest lessons are not learned through accomplishment, but rather by bearing futility with great endurance. There you really gain the most. When outside, there's nothing. When the body's weak and the mind isn't contributing anything, except that it has this tremendous power of stability, then you really have achieved something." In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, even disease and death are described as austerities. Death is described as the highest of austerities, paramam tapaha. We can learn from all things. They can be used to turn the mind inward, Godward. Everything that happens to the spiritual aspirant can be used in this way. If we take realization of God to be the goal, then everything that happens becomes a tool, an instrument, a way to attain the goal. There's a famous prayer of Kunti, the mother of the Pandava brothers. When Shri Krishna granted her a boon, she prayed she would always have adversity. And he asked her, "Why did you ask for this strange boon?" She replied, "O Krishna, whenever I am in adversity, I always remember you. You are the first one I turn to, the first thought in my mind. Therefore, let me always remain in adversity." We can actually use suffering to turn the mind toward God. And if we do that, it can help us when we meet all the problems of life. I am not advocating seeking suffering. We will get plenty without looking for it. We all have our own hair shirts handed down and tailor-made just for us. But when we have pain or encounter a painful situation of any sort, we can try to remember and call on God or assert our higher nature. Swamiji tells us, but it's a tremendous truth that if there be any real worth in you, the more the circumstances are against you, the more will that inner power manifest. So suffering certainly can be turned into a spiritual advantage for the true aspirant. If the body suffers, we can tell ourselves, "I'm not the body." We can make that into a spiritual practice. Every twinge of pain can be a reminder to do japa. When something is wrenching our heart, we can analyze it and try to understand where we're sticking to it and what is causing it to be so painful. It's said that the tree that is shaken by a storm develops very strong roots. Storms and stresses in life can actually strengthen our resolve. So they say, if old age comes, disease comes, difficulty, external and internal arise. If we have the power of endurance to remain calm and bear our burden without being bowed down by it, then we have really achieved something. Even the little things of everyday life can be used to build our inner strength. Saint Teresa once said, "One must die by pinpricks." And often it's just that. Nothing big and showy to be done, just the little things. When we're already tired, when we're too busy or too rushed to take the time, things that nobody notices but one knows inside could have been done in a better way. These are the hard things. Often we fail. This is where the real struggle takes place. We feel, oh yes, Lord, I do want to be purified. We desire some heroic or noble sacrifice everyone is going to notice. It's humbling to realize that it's the little things that are being asked. We feel, oh God, does it have to be like this? Do I really have to get along with this difficult person? Do I have to give up my resentment? Do I really have to curb my tongue and not talk behind others' backs? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. This is what I'm asking of you. The path, the opportunities are right here for every one of us, in our families, in our work, in our convents, in our monasteries, in our homes. This doesn't mean doing things with a sigh or a martyred attitude. No, it means doing it with love and therefore with joy. Can we do it? The whole of life can be viewed as a great sacrifice or yajna. The Chandogya Upanishad says, man indeed is a sacrifice. Every action offers us an opportunity to sacrifice our little selves. Swami Vivekananda says, it's easier to reconcile one's fate as a sacrifice. We're all sacrifices, each in his own way. The great worship is going on, and no one can see the meaning except that it's a great sacrifice. But those who are willing escape a lot of pain. Those who resist are broken into submission and suffer more. Now I'm willing, and I'm determined to be that willing sacrifice. End of quote. When Brother Lawrence was going through a difficult period, he found he didn't get any relief until he stopped struggling. When I thought of nothing but to end my days in those troubles, I found myself changed all at once, and my soul, which had been in trouble, felt a profound inward peace, as if she were at her center and place of rest. But this sacrifice should be a joyful one. Remember, we are all seeking happiness, a higher happiness. Can we offer ourselves joyfully, whether circumstances are easy or difficult? If there is love, life becomes joyful like a song. Things can be faced with joy by a truly advanced spiritual seeker because their surrender is complete. It's the little ego that suffers. St. Francis said, suffering, if you accept it lovingly, can give an intensity to one's prayer which nothing else can give. Teresa again said, love lives only on sacrifice. So if one is completely dedicated to loving, one must expect to be sacrificed unreservedly. Suffering can actually transform a person. Mahatma Gandhi said, the conviction has been growing upon me that things of fundamental importance to the people are not secured by reason alone, but have to be purchased by their suffering. Suffering is the law of human beings. War is the law of the jungle. But suffering is infinitely more powerful than the law of the jungle for converting the opponent and opening his ears, which are otherwise shut to the voice of reason. I've come to this fundamental conclusion that if you want something really important to be done, you must not really just satisfy the reason. You have to move the heart too. The appeal to reason is more to the head, but the penetration of the heart comes from suffering. It opens the understanding in a man. Things born with patience and forbearance yield great inner strength to one self, and they also have an effect on others. Somehow suffering can open that human heart to compassion. When a person truly sacrifices him or herself with love and joy, all hearts respond to him. A truly loving and compassionate person understands the suffering of another, and the other person feels this, even if it's not overtly expressed. Shri Ramakrishna tells us that as Maya exists, so also does Daya, or compassion. Our attachment to our relatives brings sorrow when we want something in return, and this is called Maya by Shri Ramakrishna. Maya is our love for one's relatives, wife, children, brother, sister, nephew, father, mother. But Daya is the same love for all created beings without any distinction. Maya entangles a man and turns him away from God. But through Daya, one realizes God. There's only one love manifesting in so many ways. It is me and mineness that's the problem. Suffering can broaden the heart. One can sympathize and understand the suffering of others. It not only gives strength as heat tempers iron into steel, but it also polishes off the corners and gives depth to the soul. We must have all seen at some time a piece of old wood, a handle of a much-used tool, a desk, or a musical instrument, which has become so smooth and mellow that it almost seems to glow with age. It's beautiful. It has become this way by being repeatedly touched and used. Driftwood, which is buffeted by the waves and ground onto the sand, bleached by the sun, is white and smooth. A river stone can become polished and almost luminous because of the friction with which it grinds against other stones in the water. It shines. It becomes an emblem of Shiva himself, worthy of worship. Sometimes the face of the old and the sick are like this. They're almost translucent, where the light behind the eyes seems so close to the surface and it's ready to burst forth any moment into freedom. But wait a minute, are we back to some sort of pain-hugging religious idea? No, I want to stress this. Sacrifice doesn't necessarily mean pain. If it's done with love, it will actually bring joy. This is the great key. Listen to these words from a conversation with the Dalai Lama. Questioner: Your Holiness always says that suffering increases inner strength. Dalai Lama: That's right. Questioner: But some people might think, well then, I should seek more suffering in order to become stronger. Dalai Lama laughing: This I do not mean. Questioner: But voluntary suffering in a way, isn't that what it is? Don't bodhisattvas sometimes seek suffering on purpose? Dalai Lama: Oh yes, they do. I want to take on myself the suffering of all living beings. They directly enter into suffering that way. But in that case, you see, actually suffering doesn't come. Questioner: Is that so? When they seek suffering, they don't get any? Dalai Lama: No, never. The wishing for suffering makes the suffering itself disappear. That's it. The wishing for suffering, the willing sacrifice makes the suffering itself disappear. It seems that suffering is really our resistance to something. If we're asked to give and we resist, we suffer. If we're asked to sacrifice and we're unwilling, we suffer. If we're asked to give and we give away willingly, it's a joy. Swamiji in his poem to a friend says, give, give, give away. That's the one thing. We're constantly being asked to give ourselves. If we give without being asked, it's even more of a joy. If I ask you again to look into your own mind, you will see it. Often when we suffer, this unwillingness to give is the cause of it. Something in us is resisting, it's grabbing and holding. And if that resistance goes, the suffering goes with it. They say that clinging to life itself is a source of suffering. Pavari Baba, a great saint, once was bitten by a cobra and he fell down unconscious. He survived the poison. And when he came back to consciousness and was asked what happened, he said, "A messenger came from my beloved." Saint Teresa, who was actually dying of tuberculosis, said to her sister, "Oh, don't be concerned about me. I've come to the point where I cannot suffer any longer, because suffering is sweet to me. Whatever is God's will pleases me. I love everything that God in His goodness sends me." What a wonderful state of mind, how free, to see that everything is God's will, and to feel that anything that God's will is sweet. There's a Sufi poem. Rabia, while sick in bed, by two saints was visited. Holy Nanak, Hassam wise, men of mark and Muslim eyes. Nanak said, "The one who's sure will his master's chastisement endure." Hassam said, in a deeper sense, he uttered his experience. Men who love their master's choice will in chastisement rejoice. Rabia, seeing some selfish will lingering in their answers still, spoke her words, "O men of grace, he who sees his master's face will not in his prayers recall that he is chastised at all." It's one thing to face our own suffering and try to rise above it, but how about the sufferings of others? A loved one suffers a great loss or is completely immobilized by a mental illness. We feel helpless. How can we understand such a thing? I don't say we can really understand it, but we can open our hearts to the other people and try to reduce their suffering. As I am, so are they. As they are, so am I. We can try to see God in them and serve. And sometimes, if we are hurt in some way, we find that if we just do something for somebody else, it will help us. If we can forget for a moment our own hurt and consider somebody else's situation, we find that our own pain is actually lifted. Another way is to step back and see the whole picture as a great cosmic sacrifice. Someone said recently that in an epic such as the Mahabharata, one gets a cosmic view like this. Everything is interconnected, and it meets on a great battlefield, good and evil mixed up in the cosmic conflict. And one must fight in the midst of it all. People are being born and they're dying, wars and joyous celebrations, good and evil, always together in a cosmic dance. Even the birth and death of the whole universe is part of this divine play. This existence of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky. Life is rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. From one standpoint, it's just the play of consciousness, the divine, blissful play of the Mother Kali, who holds both joy and sorrow, birth and death in her hands, and who is dancing the dance of creation as well as destruction. But this viewpoint is not so easy to keep in the face of suffering. Even the great Ramakrishna once said, "Yes, it's all divine play, but my arm has been broken." It's true that worldwide calamities can also arouse a feeling of compassion in many people. To a greater or lesser degree, it can open our eyes to see that even the perpetrators of such violence are suffering, perhaps even more than the victims. because they are caught in a hell of anger, hatred, and violence. Violent actions frighten us so much because we carry the seeds of violence within ourselves. Remember, we are very much the same, imprisoned by our own anger, resentments, and fears. Are we nonviolent within ourselves? Have we really overcome anger? What about the suffering of those who seem completely innocent? This quotation is from a conversation with Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and it gives us one viewpoint. At one point, toward the end of the journey, I asked her how she or anyone could explain why children need to suffer. She thought for a moment and said, "Our Lord's suffering was a device chosen by him to show the world the path out of affliction. Similarly, when children suffer, their suffering is possibly meant to compel humanity to act on their behalf, and thus to serve as its own savior." What an interesting thought. By giving up oneself for others, one saves oneself. This selfless service is one of the ways to overcome our own suffering. Swami Vivekananda says, first root out this idea of helping and then go to worship. Serve the living God. God comes to you in the blind, the halt, the poor, the weak, the diabolical. It's not the receiver that is blessed, but the giver. Be thankful that you're allowed to exercise your power of benevolence and mercy in the world and thus become pure and perfect. In our own time, Shri Ramakrishna died of throat cancer. Did he really suffer? Some feel he never suffered, that he was always aware of his true divine nature. Yet looking at a picture of his body taken at the time of his death, you will see his body was emaciated until it was just skin and bone. Anyone who's been near a cancer patient who's dying knows that there can be a great deal of pain and suffering. Yet those who were near Sri Ramakrishna said he was all bliss. How wonderful. What a message. These great ones show us how to overcome body consciousness, even disease and death. Yes, even a lingering and painful kind of illness like cancer can be overcome. A person can live free while living in a body. There can be an end to sorrow. An incarnation comes. God takes on human form in order to show mankind how to overcome suffering and death. There is something that does not die, and it never suffers. To be an embodied being means to take on suffering. Even incarnations do this. But suffering itself, if properly turned, can lead us back to our own true nature. Why do we suffer? Because we're ignorant, because we're confused, and we still have something to learn. We're still thinking about ourselves as bodies, something small, individual, incomplete. We feel we need to get something or do something. We feel separated and not whole. This is painful, so we suffer. But perhaps there's a reason for it all. Perhaps the individual soul or jiva learns through suffering and begins to really search for the way out. Or perhaps we should say that he searches and he actually turns inward. For it's only from within that the answer will come. Suffering itself may be the teacher that wakes us up, makes us want to be free. A sage said, "Compassion is the foundation of earnestness. Compassion for yourself and for others, born of suffering, your own and that of others." Remember, we're not alone. There are great souls like Swami Vivekananda who out of compassion have vowed to be born again and again to help mankind reach freedom. We come here to learn to be free. According to Advaita Vedanta, there's only one reality in the universe, which is it calls Brahman. Everything else is unreal, manifested and manufactured manufactured out of Brahman by the power of Maya. To reach back to that Brahman is our goal. Even suffering may lead us to that goal. Through spiritual discipline, voluntary self-sacrifice, and complete self-abnegation, the soul can become perfect and pure, free of suffering itself. The Bhagavad Gita calls this state the end of sorrow, and this is the goal that we are all seeking. Let me end with a prayer from the Bhagavatam. A Swami told me when he first heard this, it changed his whole life. Om Konu Syat Upayatrayena Aham Sarvam Dehinam Anta Pravisya Satatam Bhaveyam Dukkha Parapaka. O Lord, is there any way by which I can enter into the heart of every being and carry the burden of their suffering all the time? Is there any way? Om Dyo Shantir Antariksham Shanti Prithivi Shantir Apa Shanti O Shadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Vishwe Deva Shantir Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantir Eva Shanti Same Shantireti Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heaven, peace is in the sky, on the earth and in the waters. The herbs, the plants, and the trees are all full of peace. The gods are peaceful. Everything in the universe is pervaded by peace. May this eternal universal peace enter our soul and being. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.